I'm Graham Atkinson, and I was a survivor of the Siloam Bridge Collapse. On the night of February 23rd, 1975, it was foggy, the wind was blowing, there were people calling for help. My family wound up in the river that night. There were 20 people that went in that night. 4 souls were lost, 16 got out. I'm one of those. The way we got there is an important part of the story, I think. We were at home Sunday night, my family was watching TV, and we got the doorbell started ringing just frantically, just ding, 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 ding. My dad went to the door, and it was my aunt. And she and my grandparents, her parents, had been to the house right next door to the house where I live now, same house. And when they had left to come out, they heard people calling for help. And so they stopped by to get my dad to go down there with them. My grandparents were 75, so they wanted somebody else to go down to see what was going on. When I heard what they said, I said, I want to go. And when I said, I want to go, my sister said, well, I'm going to go. And my mother said, well, if everybody's going, I'm going to go. So all 4 of us loaded into the car. We made our way down to the bridge. It looks much different now than it did at that time. The road has moved to a different place. The bridge is in a different spot. And it used to be like a ramp that you went up to and on the bridge and then back down the other side. We went down the dip, started up the ramp. You could just barely see the tail lights. It was so foggy. Even though the car was just a few feet in front of you, you could just barely see the tail lights were there. And all of a sudden, my grandparents' tail lights disappeared. We didn't know what had happened, but my dad saw what happened. And he jammed on the brakes, and we came so close to stopping. The front end went over, hesitated, and then we flipped on over down to the bottom. My sister and I were talking the other day that she was 12, I was 10. And on the way down, it seemed like it took forever. We just like we were falling and falling and falling. And she and I actually looked over at each other, and both of us had this expression like, what are we doing? And it's just like you're floating through the air. And then all of a sudden, bam! Glass starts breaking, metal starts bending, and you come back to that reality that, oh man, you know, we're in a mess there. So we started asking each other, is everybody okay? Is everybody okay? My dad kicked his door open, it was jammed. He got my mother out, she was in the front seat, and her right arm was disabled after that. She only had about 30% use of her arm, but she had a bag of bones where it just broken her arm into little bitty pieces right here. My dad told my sister, said, go up and stop traffic. He said, Graham, take your mother, get up to the top of the hill, help your sister. So my sister went out ahead. We was coming up right behind them, my mother and I was kind of helping her along. My sister started flagging down a car that was coming that way. It was one of our next door neighbors. His name was Grover Scott. He had heard commotion and was coming down to see what it was. And she stopped him just feet before he went off that bridge. Some of you all have mentioned Mike and Jill and Bobby Matthews and that crowd. Well, they were all friends of my parents. When he got us out of the car and he put me up on top of the car, for whatever reason, I don't remember why, but we heard another car coming. And I remember looking up and seeing the underneath of that Jeep with the spare tire on it, flying over the top of us, flipping in the air, and it landed on top of my grandparents' car. That's an image that I have in my mind forever, I think.
Was that Mike and them?
It was, yep, Mike and Bobby and Jill, yep. So after that, things began to happen in a hurry. Grover Scott, as I said, was there, and he was the only adult at the top of the hill that wasn't injured at that time. And I heard my dad call out from the river and say, I need a boat and 2 ropes. And so a gentleman named K.C. France that worked for Grover had a little john boat, and they all had ropes. So they brought those down there, and before first responders showed up on the Surry side, my dad was in there getting people out of the river. He went over to his parents' car first, of course, reached in and felt that they were both dead. And his sister was in the back seat with the water coming through, but she was not, her face was not in the water. He wasn't able to get her out, but he was able to, she was positioned so that she wasn't going to drown immediately. He went over to the Scott's car that somebody mentioned a while ago, and he was looking for something to open the door with. So he told them that they were sitting in the car just with this look, he says, you know, just like was described, that they weren't able to communicate. And he told them, give me the keys. He was wanting to get in the trunk to get the tire tool. They didn't respond to him, so he reached in, got the keys, went back and got the tire tool, and went back to work, trying to get people out of the river. One of the things that we learned from some of the rescue folks that got my grandparents out, and my dad was there, he stayed in the river until his mother and father were both out, and his sister, before he refused to come out until then, that my grandparents were holding hands when they died. Another ironic thing about that is I found a report just the other day that was generated 2 days after the bridge collapse from the North Carolina Department of Transportation. And it said, Siloam Bridge number 192. In 1937, Hugh Atkinson, who was my grandfather, and other community members, at their insistence, we decided to build a bridge in Siloam. That bridge was put there in 1938. It was taken out of storage. This was the third place that bridge had been. It stood until February the 13th, the 23rd, 1975. Inside my grandfather's coat pocket was a letter where he had been corresponding with the state of North Carolina, telling them this bridge is unsafe. It needs to be fixed. Just a few days prior to that, James Holshouser, who was the governor at the time, was in Surry County for a campaign stop, and it was over at Pine Hill at an old country store that was there, Bruner's store at the time. And he tried his best to talk to the governor about it, and the governor was not interested. Got in the car and left. So he died with that letter in his pocket. In fact, the reason he was there that night, out that night, was he had gone to the neighbor's house and they were discussing that. The bridge was in disrepair. It was unsafe. It should have never been standing there in that condition. And from things that were picked up that night, pictures that I've had since then, people that I've talked to that were there, including the gentleman that was accused of knocking the bridge down. His name was J.T. Venable. He came to our house after that, and he said, yes, I hit the bridge. But the reason I hit the bridge was it was falling when I went on it. It's like if you put a dime in a quart jar and you shake it around, it's going to hit the sides. But it's not the dime's fault. The bridge was in storage. The demand was there for the bridge, and after the relentless demand, they decided they would put a bridge there, but they were going to take one that was out of storage. Obviously it was taken down for a reason somewhere else. But they took it out of storage, they brought it down there, they put it up, and to the credit, from 1938 to 1975, it served that community well. But they didn't take care of it. They would paint over cracks that were in it. I've actually got a picture from the Atkinson side where the bolts were supposed to be holding the bridge in the concrete. There's bolts on this side, there's no bolts here. They were already rusted through and gone. I will always believe that bridge was falling when J.T. Venable went on it, and it's the fault of the state of North Carolina and their negligence that tragedy happened. Well, we talk about the tragedy, and absolutely it was a tragedy. Unbelievable, incomprehensible. But as often happens, good things sometimes come from bad. And it's been touched on here a little bit, but not to the extent that it really happened. The way the community came together after that. Everybody in the community was affected by it. They knew somebody that was involved with it. They knew somebody that was hurt. They knew somebody that died. They were friends with those families. The community rallied around The ladies at the lunchroom at Copeland School fixed lunch for the people that were working down there, sent it to them. They did the same thing when the temporary bridge was there. So that was one good thing that came from that. Another good thing that came from that was shortly after that, the governor ordered that all the bridges be inspected in the state of North Carolina and find the ones that needed to be replaced. What gets lost sometimes in the story is after everybody got out of the river that night and everybody started to heal their physical wounds and deal with their emotional wounds, there still was no way for people from Yadkin County to get to Surry and Surry County to get to Yadkin. And that was a real hindrance to everybody on both sides of the river for miles either way. You had to go way, way out of your way to cross either at Rockford or Donahaw to cross the bridge. So my dad decided that was not acceptable, and he remembered when he was in the Army that they used to put up pontoon bridges. So he decided we should have a pontoon bridge. So he went to Raleigh and he talked to many people there. So he was determined or decided we should have the bridge. He went to the state of North Carolina, had conversations with them, and they told him it can't be done, it's not going to happen. And he told them it could be done, and it absolutely was going to happen. So after going through a lot of people that said no, he got in touch with Senator Robert Morgan's office. There was a man named Les Rourke, and he was an aide to Senator Morgan. He was the guy that cared. And he found out, yes, it can be done, and the Army Corps of Engineers can do it. And they are stationed down at Fort Bragg. And long story short, in June of 1975, the Army Corps of Engineers invaded Siloam, moved in with all kinds of equipment and people, and they stayed there until a pontoon bridge was erected over the river. And again, we could travel from one side to the other. But it had to get to the right person that cared, somebody that cared enough about it, that didn't say no, that said how. In fact, I found a note just the other day from Les Rourke on Senator Morgan's letterhead that said, what was it said? Something to the effect of, they said it couldn't be done. In Senator Morgan's office, we don't stop until it is.